Mounting tension between Egypt and Israel. Angry demonstrations in Cairo as the Egyptian ambassador is being recalled. Rebel forces in Libya consolidate their advance towards the capital. They claim to have captured more cities. The moment a gun was fired at British police during riots in the city of Birmingham earlier this month. Welcome to BBC World News. I'm Adnan Nawaz, also in this programme. Cheers for the Pope as he arrives to conduct Mass in Madrid, but protests about the cost of his Spanish visit. Singing against communism, the folk songs that galvanised Estonia's fight for independence. Welcome once again. The Egyptian cabinet says it's withdrawing the country's ambassador from Israel. It follows the deaths of 5 Egyptian policemen reportedly shot by Israeli forces who were chasing suspected Palestinian militants. Meanwhile, hundreds of Egyptians have demonstrated outside the Israeli embassy in Cairo. They have been burning the Israeli flag and chanting anti-Israeli slogans. Shaimaa Khalil reports from Cairo.
As the numbers grew outside the high security of the Israeli embassy in Cairo, the chants grew louder. Protesters called for the embassy to be closed and the ambassador expelled.
Our demand is to expel the Israeli ambassador from Egypt and to reject any Israeli.
Last night, in scenes that were unheard of during the Mubarak era, protesters tore down the metal barriers surrounding the 20-story building housing the embassy. Pictures of the late Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser, known for his anti-Israeli and pan-Arab stances, were held up high during the protests. Egypt says it will withdraw its ambassador to Israel in protest at the deaths of 5 security personnel reportedly shot by Israeli forces. Cairo said it holds Israel politically and legally responsible and demands an investigation and an apology. Israel has promised to conduct an investigation. Meanwhile, in Gaza City, several Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes launched in response to militant rockets that have struck the Israeli town of Ashdod. The militants fired more than 20 rockets at southern Israel on Friday, wounding several people. These clashes have inflamed an already volatile Arab street, especially here in Egypt. This particular conflict with Gaza draws growing concern over Egypt's Sinai border, with fears that the Sinai desert region has become increasingly lawless since Mr. Mubarak was ousted, with a rise in Al-Qaeda-inspired militant activity. Shaimaa Khalil, BBC News, Cairo.
Well, let's go to Cairo because Shaimaa is there for us now. Shaimaa, who are the protesters? Do they belong to a particular grouping? Are they young and old? What's their sort of demographic?
Well, Adnan, they're of all walks of life in the Egyptian society. And, I asked that same question to one of the protesters on the phone who was outside the embassy. I said, well, what are the groups? Who are the groups that are there? And he said, it is the Egyptian people. It is all of us. There are no groups here. And it was very interesting. He said, this is like the new Tahrir Square. We're all here united. This is about Egypt, not about parties.
Of course, most of the recent protests in Egypt have been demanding internal change and for that to come more quickly. But now this is directed externally. Presumably, that will probably, but it will be a worry to Israel, of course.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, it's quite obvious from the military council's reaction in the past. The military council has been quite heavy-handed on protests, especially the ones that they've dispersed by the beginning of Ramadan. But with this one, again, as protesters would tell me, there were, the presence of the military, the riot police were there, military police were there, but they were there and they were watching the protests happen, and there weren't any clashes. And obviously, they want to be seen as the protectors of these demonstrations, especially when they are directed at Israel.
How have you found opinion formers, sort of newspapers, politicians in this new era in Egypt to be talking about Israel? Are they more tempered, presumably, than those protesters that we see?
Well, I mean, the mass majority here would tell you that it is now time to re-examine that peace treaty with Israel. Obviously, protesters would go as far as saying we do not want a peace treaty with Israel, but politicians, more seasoned politicians like Ayman Noor, for instance, are saying that comments like Ehud Barak's of the military not getting a bargaining point in reassessing and re-questioning the articles about the military troops in Sinai. So some people are actually saying that this is a good chance to re-examine the peace treaty with Israel.
All right, Shaimaa Khalil in Cairo for the moment. Thanks very much. A Libyan opposition TV